Welcome to Justice Matters. I'm Denise George, Attorney General of the U.S. Virgin Islands. Justice Matters aims to inform, engage, and empower you with knowledge of Virgin Islands laws that affect our everyday lives. We have insightful discussions with special guests on the laws and related issues so you can be empowered to make a difference. Today's topic is crime and corruption. We will talk about the local laws that address public corruption, fraud, and abuse by public officials, with a peek at some of the real public corruption cases. And joining me later, my special guest, retired VI Inspector General for over 33 years, who will give us some great insight on this topic so you can be a part of the solution. First of all, what is public corruption? Public corruption involves dishonesty, fraud, abuse by public employees, which involves a breach of the public trust. It includes most often crimes of embezzlement, falsifying public records, conflicts of interests, and bribery by government employees and officials. Or as one of my former white-collar crime professors simply put it, lying, cheating, and stealing. It's based on the principle that public monies belong to the government to be used as directed for the public good. For instance, public officials or employees who are entrusted with control of government funds can only use such public funds according to how the law says it can be used and cannot appropriate it to their own personal use other than that. Now, doing so would amount to embezzlement and a breach of the public trust. Let's take a look at the local crimes that specifically address misconduct of public officials and employees charged with the public trust. Conflict of interest. Local conflict of interest laws under Title III, BIC, Section 1103 and 1108 make it a criminal offense for a territorial officer or employee to be financially interested in any government contract, public sale, or transaction made or negotiated by him in his official capacity or by any public agency of which he is a member. The law prohibits an employee to derive a direct monetary gain or suffer a direct monetary loss by reason of his official activity. Such an offense is punishable by imprisonment for a minimum of 1 year and a maximum of 5 years. Section 403 of the Criminal Code, solicitation or receipt of bribes by public officers or employees. That law says, whoever being a judicial or other public officer or employee asks or receives any emolument, gratuity, or reward, or any promise thereof, except such as may be authorized by law, for doing any official act, shall be fined no more than $1,000 or imprisoned not more than 5 years or both. That's bribery. And perhaps the most comprehensive local public corruption law describing offenses committed by public officials and employees in violation of the public trust appears in Title 14, Section 1662 of our Criminal Code, and it's entitled Embezzlement or Falsification of Public Accounts. Under this law, a public officer or person charged with the receipts, safekeeping, transfer, or disbursement of public monies can face up to 10 years imprisonment and up to $10,000 in fines if that employee, for example, appropriates the public monies or any portion thereof to his own use or the use of another without authority of law, or loans the public monies or any portion thereof, or makes a profit out of or uses the public monies for any purpose not authorized by law, unlawfully deposits the public monies or any portion thereof in any bank or with any banker or other person, knowingly keeps any false account or makes any false entry or erasure in any account of or relating to those public funds, fraudulently alters, falsifies, conceals, destroys, or obliterates any account or documents relating to those public funds, willfully omits or refuses to pay over to any officer or person authorized by law to receive the same any money received by him under any duty imposed by law to pay over those funds. Let's look back at a few real-life cases as examples of local and federal public corruption prosecutions in the past years here in the VI. A former government employees retirement system administrator was convicted in Virgin Islands Superior Court of embezzlement, grand larceny, forgery, and fraud for submitting a falsified entry in the GERS budget showing the CFO position as vacant when in fact he was illicitly being paid that extra full six-figure salary on top of his own salary. A former employee of the Lieutenant Governor's office responsible for collecting property taxes and conducting property auctions was prosecuted and convicted in Virgin Islands Superior Court for fraudulently conspiring with others in a fraudulent property tax auction scheme to manipulate the bidding process in their favor. Another former commissioner of the Department of Planning and Natural Resources, together with a former Department of Property and Procurement commissioner, were prosecuted and convicted in federal district court for accepting a series of bribes and kickbacks in exchange for awarding over $1 million in government contracts and progress payments for very little work performed. These are just examples of some of the public corruption cases in past years to give you a better understanding of the types of cases we talk about that actually happened. All of the local crimes before the Virgin Islands Superior Court are prosecuted by the Virgin Islands Attorney General. Title III, Section 118 of the VI Code, in fact, mandates a section of the Department of Justice to be designated for the aggressive prosecution of white-collar crime and public corruption. Just to be clear, though, these white-collar and public corruption crimes are not unique to the Virgin Islands, and public corruption is widespread nationally and around the world. But what's good is that we do have here the ingredients to keep corruption in check: effective law enforcement with a strong legal framework and an independent, effective court system. The one agency created specifically to address exclusively fraud, waste, and abuse in government through government audits and criminal investigations is the Office of the Inspector General of the Virgin Islands. A few of the prosecutions I mentioned actually arose from an IG audit or criminal investigation, which was then referred to the Attorney General's office. The IG office often works in conjunction with the Attorney General's office. By law, the Office of the VI Inspector General is a separate, independent agency of the government of the Virgin Islands. The IG is appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the legislature, without regard to political affiliation and solely on the basis of integrity, demonstrated ability in accounting, auditing, financial management, or investigations. The VI Inspector General serves a term of 7 years and may be removed from office by the governor only for neglect of duty or malfeasance in office. This is how our laws protect the integrity and impartiality and independence of the Inspector General. Title III, VIC, Section 1203 mandates that the VI Inspector General conduct and supervise audits, inspections, and related investigations of programs and operations of the government of the Virgin Islands in order to prevent and detect fraud, waste, and abuse in such programs and operations. And I got to say that I'm really honored to have with us here today Stephen Van Beverhoudt, the Inspector General, retired Inspector General of the Virgin Islands. And I'm honored to have him here because I actually pulled him out of retirement to sit with us and discuss these important issues regarding government, fraud, waste, abuse, corruption. Okay, well, tell me, how does the work of the Inspector General's office protect from the government from waste, fraud, and abuse?
Well, our mission is to not only audit the government to see how it's operating on its functions, but we also have the responsibility, if we find instances of fraud, waste, or abuse, to investigate. So we have an investigative unit as well as an audit unit.
Okay, what is the difference really?
The auditors look for more for internal controls, if an agency or an entity is meeting its responsibilities in accordance with regulations or rules, if they uncover instances where it's a potential for fraud or fraud is being committed, then that is referred to the investigative unit, who would carry it a step further. They would work with the Attorney General's office to try and build a case to present to a court. As you know, or as the public knows, you have to be able to prove to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that the crime was committed.
Right.
So that requires a lot of building of evidence, and so the investigators would get more in-depth into the particular instance.
Right. So then the investigation, though, is different in that it's more of a criminal investigation to see if there's criminal culpability. But then with respect to the audit, initially it's going in there to look and see whether or not there may be fraud, waste, or abuse, or maybe waste or abuse that may or may not become criminal. Is that how it works?
Yes. Sometimes we get requests to look at, an agency head may suspect something is going wrong with funds, maybe being, unaccounted for or whatever. So the auditors may go in. It could be accounting mistakes or errors. But if there's evidence to show that it's a repetitive thing, that's an indication of potential fraud. A one-time thing is kind of hard to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there was intent. For fraud to exist, you must have a willful intent to do something wrong, to get financial or monetary or some type of gain for that individual. Making a mistake, an accounting mistake that results in the loss of money doesn't necessarily mean that it was fraud.
Right. So it could be then, I guess, mismanagement.
It could be mismanagement. It could be
incompetence, waste.
Yeah, it can be waste. It can be an abusive situation. Waste would be, let's say I as a agency head decide to refurnish my office and buy the most expensive furniture on the market. That's wasting government funds.
Right.
But that's not necessarily fraud.
Right.
It's not a fraudulent event. That's wasteful, but it's not fraud.
Okay, right. That's absolutely right. So, but how would you describe, first of all, what is, when you talked about waste and you talked about, how about abuse? You talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. You talk about fraud, and what about abuse? Like, how do you, describe that generally when you are approaching it from the Inspector General auditing type perspective?
Well, an abusive situation can be, again, let's say I'm an agency head and I have, the sticker that says 24-hour use of my vehicle, let's say. And I use it to go to the beach with the whole family, pile into the beach, and the whole family piles in, and we go grocery shopping, and I just use the car, abuse the privilege that I have as an agency head to use a car, have a car for 24-hour use, to abuse that privilege of using the car. That would be abuse.
So I guess the next question is, why should we care?
Because any money that is lost, any resources that are lost, the government doesn't have that money to put to useful purposes. We've been inundated with federal funds right now, and they are very stringent and very particular in how the funds are to be used. So if it's stolen by fraud, or we're wasteful in using it, or we abuse, we end up having to reimburse the federal government when they come in and take a look at the use of their funds. Our local funds are very limited. They've always been, all the years I've been limited. So when you see that our schools are not properly maintained and there's no money for maintenance, when you say, sometimes I've heard a budget of $2 and $3 million a year for maintenance for the schools. That's ridiculous. There's no way you can maintain all the schools in the territory for $2 or $3 million.
Right.
If money is being lost, fraudulently, if people are stealing money, that's money that's not going into the betterment of the people. So we should all care about our territory and our government to make sure that funds are not being wasted or abused or stolen.
What is it that you hope to be accomplished now when you just do your audits and you find certain things, like I guess they call it findings and everything, and there are problems, whether it's abuse, whether it's mismanagement, or it goes to the criminal as far as fraud. What is it that you try to accomplish with it, with the results?
Well, when we make the recommendations, we hope that management look at us as there to help. Mm-hmm. It's always good to have somebody on the outside looking at our operations, because it's a fresh look at what we're doing, mm-hmm. at what the agency is doing. Mm-hmm. So we try to make recommendations to help agencies improve, to do something better. If you're not, if it's federal funds and you're not meeting the federal requirements or whatever, we bring it to your attention so that you can correct it and hopefully not have to refund this money back to the feds. If we can help you to operate more efficiently and more effectively, then it cuts back on fraud, waste, and abuse.
Mm-hmm. Have you, over the years, how would you describe the cooperation from the agencies and everything when you do these audits? Do they tend to be cooperative, or does it vary? How does it go?
It varies. Over the years, I must admit that it has gotten better. Mm-hmm. When I first started as the IG, umpteen years ago, we were looked at as the enemy. Mm. We're not considered part of the government. We're always looked at as somebody outside coming to see what we're doing wrong. But over time, because we go there, and I always have the motto that the only person that needs to be afraid of us is the criminal who's stealing money. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
That's the position I've always taken.
Right.
We're there to help. We're there to point out areas that you can improve and improve your operations and hopefully be more effective and more efficient in what you do, mm-hmm. and thus save money and have more money for your function. Mm-hmm. So, that's the intent. When we make the recommendations, we hope that entities will accept them or follow them and try to implement them. We hope that the higher-ups would pay attention to them and put pressure on the agencies to meet the recommendations and do what we recommend.
And it helps for them to provide, for the agency, the government agency, to provide better services then.
Yes,
to the public, which is that's what they're there for, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then what about, the criminal aspect of it, the fraud part? How important do you think that is? And to what extent do you think that it is absolutely necessary that the work that you do when you discover these types of wrongdoing, that you really bring it forward and the government pays attention to it and addresses it?
Well, fraud is all over the place. Mm-hmm. Everywhere, every entity, every government throughout the United States, there's fraud.
Right.
There's no way you're going to you're going to stop 100% of it. Mm-hmm. But you hope that by being aggressive and getting prosecutions and bringing stuff out to the public, the fraudsters may think twice and say, maybe I need to watch what I'm doing, because somebody's going to be coming and watching what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So.
And the fraud that of course, the Inspector General's office deals only with government,
yes.
Government audits, government investigations with government employees. So so it's really the fraud we talk about is what we also call corruption.
Exactly.
Right? And when that happens, tell us what the process is, first of all, when you discover that there's something that needs to be sent or investigated, or something looks amiss during the audit, that there might be some wrongdoing. What do you do? What's the process?
If the auditors see something that has indications of potential fraud, mm-hmm. they will get in touch with the investigative unit, mm-hmm. and present what their findings are or what they're uncovering to the investigator. If it's a clear-cut case, the investigator would pick it up and do the more in-depth review, and the auditors a lot of times work together with the investigator, doing the financial stuff and doing the paperwork The investigator, would deal with doing the interviews and getting the actual source documents, the original documents. Auditors can work with copies of documents and stuff. For the criminal case, they have to usually get original documents to present to court. So they deal with the more in-depth building the criminal case. The auditors can work along with the investigator in building that case.
And the investigator is actually a peace officer. It's in the statute, and it was just several years ago. It wasn't at the beginning, but it was just several years ago that they actually added that to the Inspector General's statute, that you would have an actual peace officer, an agent investigator to handle those criminal cases. Right?
Yeah, they have arrest powers and everything, like any peace officer.
Right, and under the IG, who also have the subpoena powers as well under that. So when that happens, though, to what extent would you say that particular function is really important?
So the Attorney General's office is responsible for fraud and corruption throughout the territory, not only government, private sector, and everything. So we are like an extension of the Attorney General's office, because any cases that we come up with, anything that the investigator comes up with, we are always in contact with your attorneys, and we would work with your white-collar crime attorney, whoever's assigned. All of that is, again, to build a case, to get restitution, punish the criminal, and for that to go back to the community and so they can see that fraud and corruption is being addressed. It is wrong. Criminals would see it, that they can be caught if they do wrong and illegal activities.
Right. How many audits would you say that you have conducted over your many years with the IG's office?
I would say a couple hundred over the years.
And about what percentage of that would you say, knowing that the criminal jurisdiction came in recent years, but what percentage would you say that you actually, sent or referred to the Attorney General's office?
It's a small percentage. I don't know. I would say less than 10%.
Less than 10%. And are there any notable cases that you remember over the years that were criminal cases, fraud cases that were referred through?
Well, we did one on a special assistant to the governor who was writing checks to himself, and he eventually pled and served time. I was required to make restitution.
And that was over a couple $1 million, am I correct?
Yeah, at least $1 million, maybe even more than that. It was around $1 million. Yeah.
Any others stand out?
Well, we have the hospital case that dragged on for almost more than 10 years.
10 years, exactly.
That at least we put a stop to that situation.
At least exposed. Okay, well, what would you say to the community? Let's say, I know all of the years and the work that you've done in the area of detecting and investigating fraud, waste, and abuse in government. Is there something that you would say to the community that you think they need to hear, or we need to hear, with respect to that aspect of what you've done all these years?
Well, number one, I'm always of the philosophy that I would like for us, the territory, to deal with our own problems. We have a very competent AG's office with competent attorneys. We have our IG's office is very competent. We have good people in there. I would like the community to cooperate and come forward with information. Many a time, people come to me and complain that, like business people would say, I'm being forced to pay a kickback to somebody for something, and I tell them, well, let's work together. We come in and let's work together. Well, I work here, and I have to live here, so I don't want to get involved. Well, then what am I supposed to do?
Exactly.
People see audits, and you have an indication that something is wrong, but the evidence is not there for the investigator to pursue it. So we can only go so far. We hope by doing the audit we put a stop to it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to catch the person that's doing something is wrong. Although you have a feeling that something is wrong, there's no evidence to prove it. So people need to understand that, you know, we are part of the community too. We're not outsiders. So what affects them affects us, affects everybody. We have our kids going to schools here. We drive on the same roads. We use the same electricity, everything.
About how many times have you seen where you cases have started with government employees who have reported to the Inspector General's office?
Yeah, we have our hotline, 774-3388.
Okay.
We receive calls numerous times, and many of our cases that we've worked that were strictly fraud cases have come by people coming and we're getting a complaint or something coming in.
And that hotline is, say it again.
340-774-3388.
And is that a call that they can call anonymously?
It's anonymous. We don't require your name or anything. We do ask that if you're gonna come, you know, bring something. Don't just say, well, so and so is doing this. Well,
no millie, no
exactly.
gossip, but
come with some
really
kind of documented
something.
proof that we can work with,
right.
and we would take it from there and work it, and nobody would know that, you know, the person called and gave us information. We'd do it on our
Then you
own.
do the further investigation.
Exactly. Again, as you said, we have subpoena powers and everything, so we can subpoena documents and bank records and everything. We can do that.
Even in the statute also, the government employees, you know, they are protected in being able to, you know, report these things. And if you suspect it, fine, you have some information, good. And then then it's for, you know, the IG, everything to really investigate, to see and to get to the bottom of it. It may or may not turn out to be something major, but it's really important for them to report. And I think it's good, like you were saying, that you do respond. So people want to feel like some action is going to be taken. And I always think it's important that we do make that, you know, that call to action, you know, at least get involved, right? Yeah. So I think that's a really good message, and so thank you. And I noticed that you were talking in the present. We do this, we do that, so you're not used to being retired. I think you'll be forever our IG, even in retirement.
It's only been a couple of months, so I'm still getting used to retirement.
You're still, exactly. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your service all these years. So that is former retired Inspector General of the Virgin Islands, Stephen Van Beverhoudt.
Thank you.
Remember the number to call if you have reliable information of corruption, waste, or abuse in government. The number for the Inspector General's office is 340-774-3388. I just want to thank you for joining us on this episode of Justice Matters. Tune in next time, where we'll be covering part 2 of Crime and Corruption. We'll be focusing on Medicaid fraud. I think you'll learn something, so don't miss it.